Greetings to you, my friends and dearly beloved in all four corners of the globe. This is your dear brother, Brother David. My African name is Dari, and my slave name is Rick. I am coming to you in all humility for a second time. I did make a video approximately a month ago, and I wasn't sure how it would be received by the wider world out there, but I was happy to see that there were a significant number of you who saw the video and you liked it, and you sent me some very encouraging comments, which I never really expected. But I did get a few, and a number of you even requested that I do more videos in the future. Not something that I really had in mind initially. It was almost a bit of an experiment, that first video. It took me a while before I even decided to release it to the public. I took that step, and I'm not sorry that I did now, because I did get some good feedback from many of you. I do appreciate that, and I'm quite humbled actually by that. And since you have asked, many of you, for me to go a little further into the topic that I presented last time, which was essentially my strong belief, based on much evidence, that Mr. Donald Trump, that man in the White House, is an Antichrist being. He is not like us in many regards. When I say us, I'm talking about the average human being. This is a man who beats to a different drummer, cut from a different cloth. And I believe he bears the marks of an Antichrist being. And to reiterate what I said last time, there are people who point fingers at other people and call them the Antichrist. Many books have been written, all kinds of articles have been written on, quote unquote, the Antichrist. Well, I am a firm believer in the Hebrew scriptures, the book of God, also known as Yahweh, who is the God of Israel, which is repeated several times throughout the scriptures. And in those scriptures, there is mention of Antichrist. However, it's not limited to just one human being. It is actually used in a plural sense, that there are several Antichrists, and you can just find it in the books of John in the New Testament, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. We'll go into detail, and I encourage you to turn to those scriptures. They're not very long chapters at all. These are small books, just before the final book of Revelation, which I would be happy to go into in future. But there are several antichrists that will appear in the final days, of which I believe we are in. And I have a lot of reasons to believe that the man in the White House, namely Donald J. Trump, by some of his own words and admissions, has identified himself as an Antichrist. Bearing in mind that the word Antichrist doesn't only mean one who is against Christ or Christ's teachings, but it could be somebody who feels he is greater or can take the place of Christ, who we Hebrews called Yeshua, the Son of the living God. So I'm not saying that Donald Trump is consciously speaking against Christ, although many of his words, many of his actions are totally inconsistent with the fundamental teachings and characteristics of Yeshua, Jesus Christ. So I'm going to expand a little bit today on what I had stated last time. Just a little background if you would like to know a little bit about who I am. I am a teacher. I'm also a tutor. I teach many students one-on-one and in small groups and in classrooms throughout the Greater Toronto area, including the region of Durham and even out in Mississauga, in Brampton. And my background educationally is that I graduated from Carleton University in Ottawa some time ago. And my major at that time was political science, also history and philosophy. And I worked in the federal government for a number of years. It was actually 14 years altogether. In the Department of Taxation and also Immigration for several years there. I moved on from there and I wanted to strike out into the business world to see if I could make it and challenge myself a little more. So for roughly 10 years now, I have been self-employed first as a paralegal. And first as a teacher. And then I went into the legal industry, providing legal services for a number of years. And now my focus is again in teaching, which is really my first love. And so that's just a little background for those who may be curious. I would say in the last 6 months or so, I've been watching a few videos on YouTube. I wasn't a big fan initially, but over the past several months I started to view some of the offerings there on YouTube, and I've seen a number of people who claim to have special insights into events, current events, and also insights into the scriptures, what they really mean, and how they relate to the times that we're living in currently. And some of them have been quite helpful. I'm not going to say that they're all a waste of time. Some of them, to me, are a waste of time. They don't really shed any real light on our understanding of what's happening in this world. Their opinions, and everybody's entitled to their opinion. So I would never try to ban any of them, try to get them pulled off the airwaves. They're entitled to their opinions. However, for me, giving an opinion is fine, but you should be able to support those opinions with some good evidence that is credible, evidence that is convincing, persuasive. That's me. Maybe you're like that too. Maybe not. If you are, I've got some evidence for you. Evidence that to me shows that that man in the White House is not only an imposter, but he's an evil man who can do a lot of damage. And I believe he intends to inflict a lot of hurt to a lot of people. You might find this a bit outrageous at first, but carefully listen to what this man says and watch what he does, okay? And you'll see that in the next 4 years or so, that what I'm saying will ring true. Just another point, a personal point here, that I was raised in a Seventh-day Adventist faith, for those who may know something about that. They are people who believe in keeping the seventh day as God's holy day of rest, which is well-founded in Scripture. You can go through the entire Bible and you'll never see one reference to the first day of the week becoming God's holy day of rest. It's always been the seventh day. And so on that point, I am in agreement with the Adventists. However, I have been summarily banned from one of the congregations. I won't name the congregation at this point, but if you're curious, you'd like to know, feel free to ask. Just a reminder that there are comments box below the screen, and feel free at any time during this presentation or afterwards to ask questions, make comments, share your thoughts. You may agree with me, you may disagree with me. I would like to know either way how you feel about what I'm saying. The reason I was banned, essentially, they didn't want me to speak the truth too clearly, especially to those in quote-unquote powerful positions in that denomination. I had the audacity to question, for example, whether Jesus Christ really was the way he was depicted on many places within the church, in their literature, even on their walls, giant pictures of Jesus looking very European with blue eyes and long wavy hair, which is totally incongruous with the depiction of Jesus in the scriptures themselves. The book of Daniel 10 and in Revelation 1, there is a clear description of Yeshua, the Son of God, as a being with very dark skin and woolly hair, which pretty much rules out the possibility that he was European. He was obviously an Israelite. And for any serious student of history, you would know that the Israelite people in his time, living in the land of Israel, were a very dark-skinned people. So they didn't want to hear me speak that way. And there are other reasons. I would say jealousy was a big one. But anyway, that's just an aside. That's not the focus of today's presentation. I'm going to keep this brief, but I'm going to again reiterate what I said last time, and that to answer the question of whether Donald J. Trump is the Antichrist, my response to that is essentially, I don't believe that he is the Antichrist. The Antichrist is the enemy, the arch enemy of Yeshua, Jesus Christ, which is actually the devil or Satan. He is the true Antichrist. But he has a lot of agents and a lot of allies living on the face of this earth who are working with him, perhaps working for him in accomplishing his ends during these last days in particular. And one of his agents, probably the most prominent of his agents on the face of the earth at this time, I believe, is Donald J. Trump, who, as we all know by now, we've seen enough of him to realize that this is a man who is basically full of self, full of selfish ambition, constantly building himself up as the greatest being probably who ever walked on the planet. His hyperbole in everything he does. He makes everything he does the best that was ever done by anybody. Nobody can do better than him. he's actually become quite nauseating to many of us who keep hearing him saying these sort of things. He's a king of hyperbole, right, which is gross exaggeration of the truth and the facts. He's become the poster boy of hyperbole and exaggeration, and he makes no bones about it. He's not repentant of any of it. He believes that's who he is, and he's quite proud of it. So that's one of the marks of an Antichrist being, is one who is full of himself and is always trying to build himself up and exalt himself higher than anyone else. It reminds me of a scripture in the book of Ezekiel. The book of Ezekiel, in the chapter 28, it speaks of a being who, in verse 15, was perfect in all his ways until iniquity was found in him. And it says that his heart was lifted up because of his beauty, and he's been corrupted by wisdom. And it says that I, this is Jehovah, the Most High God, will cast him to the ground, and I will lay him before kings, that they may behold thee. This is basically saying that this being, this satanic being, Antichrist being, is going to be brought down, brought low from the heights that he has exalted himself up to be, the greatest, the most beautiful, the most smart, the greatest deal maker, right? Everything he does is the best, number one. But he is going to come to a sorry end. As the scriptures do say in another place, that every mountain shall become a valley. The mountain shall be made plain, and every valley will be exalted. So that's just one insight from the scriptures as to what this being would be like. And I fully am persuaded that Mr. Trump does bear that quality. Secondly, he is a lover of money. And we all know that Donald Trump is all about making the almighty dollar. Seems to be the god of his life. He inherited millions of dollars from his father. Seems like he squandered much of it, but he built it up again after declaring bankruptcy several times. That didn't deter him from his drive, from his ambition, his unrelenting ambition to make as much money as possible, even if it means exploiting people, not even paying them. There are hundreds of people right now who have filed a class action suit against Mr. Trump. These are people who were brought in as immigrants, interestingly enough, considering his anti-immigrant position that he's been taking. He brought in, I think it might be up to 1,000 immigrants who worked to build that beautiful tower that he has lived in for a very long time. That tower was built essentially on the backs of immigrants, many of whom he didn't pay. He didn't pay fully. He owes millions of dollars to the people who built that glorious tower that he's been living in. Money is extremely, extremely important to Donald Trump. And it's probably what drove him to do the things that he's done in the business world. And, he has achieved, a lot. Who can say that he hasn't been successful? He's had some failings, but he's also had a number of business successes with the running of his hotels and his golf courses. What else does he have? He has a clothing line, I believe, shirts and ties and things, many of which, incidentally, were made, again, from exploited people, often in third world countries, in sweatshops, many of them who made some of the clothing that he proudly brags about and promotes. So he's done this shamelessly. Over and over again, he has exploited people in order to accumulate the riches of this world. Another sign of an Antichrist being, the love of money. Thirdly, a disrespect for the fundamental principles of law that govern our societies. He's shown a number of times since his presidency. This is only 4 weeks now. He's already given us hints that he holds the legal system, judges, in contempt. There was a judge that blocked his immigration ban that he imposed rather arbitrarily and suddenly. Issued an executive order banning immigration from those 7 Muslim-dominated countries. And when a judge opposed him, what did he do? How was his reaction? He called him a so-called judge. And then he said, "I'll see you in court." Well, another example is day 1 of Black History Month this year, February 1st. I don't know if you caught that, but he met with several leaders of the black communities in the United States. And after the preliminaries, of course, of welcoming everybody to the table, so to speak, met them in a large boardroom, he couldn't resist mentioning his take on what's happening in the city of Chicago, where he has one of his beautiful gleaming towers in the north side, probably in the white area of Chicago. But he said that Chicago is a city that is out of control as far as the crime rate and the devastation of the inner cities, which is his code for the black community neighborhoods. He said that, if you leaders that were sitting at the table with him, he said, if you don't deal with this problem of Chicago, if you can't do something about the crime rate to control this out of control city, he said, if you can't do it, then we will. And what do you think he means by that? Then we will. Who's we? Well, he's referring to himself, his well-oiled machine, as he puts it, his government apparatus, which definitely includes the police and the military. This is a man who, after all, spent some years as a young man in a military type school, principally because of his father, who got a little tired of the misconduct of Donald Trump in school. He was a problem. He had problems with discipline, and he was disruptive, apparently, in his classes. And so his dad took him out of, it was a private school. I don't think it was a public school. And he placed him in a military school to teach him some discipline. Because you could see that his son had the proclivity to be out of control and to not be able to self-regulate. And so he put him in military school. And so ever since, Donald Trump has had a proclivity or a love of the military. And make no mistake about it, he will not hesitate to use the military to put down what he perceives as some kind of rebellion or an uprising in the inner cities. I can see a scenario where maybe a police officer may be shot, perhaps killed by someone in the inner city, and he will immediately rush the troops into the area to put down this rebellion. And quite possibly, in fact, I think quite likely, he will call for martial law, which is a suspension of the rights, the protections of the law that we all enjoy in a liberal democracy. And he will call for martial law, which means he'll be basically running the United States, maybe by city, maybe by state, maybe right across the states. He'd be running it basically as a dictator, similar to the way that leaders run their countries during a time of war. And he will get a kick out of that because he likes power. He likes exercising power. Even in his business, the business world, Donald Trump is always the man. He's the one that calls the shots. He's the one that makes the deals. He's the one that gets things done, as he puts it. And I'm sure he will be only too eager to deal with this out-of-control inner city world. So look forward to that. I don't say to look forward with great anticipation. You know, it's not going to be pretty when he does that. But don't be surprised that Donald Trump issues some sort of order, executive order, to take care, as he puts it, of the problems in the inner city. Point number 4, the Jesuit Connection. For those who are not familiar with the Jesuits, these are basically the foot soldiers of the Roman Catholic Pope, or papacy, which is the government of the Pope. And Mr. Trump was educated. That same military school that I referred to was run by the Jesuits, and quite possibly other schools that he attended were Jesuit run. These are a radical group that basically want to promote and protect the interests of the Pope. They've been around for hundreds of years, from way back in probably the turn of the 1st century or so. They've been banned in many countries throughout the world over the centuries because they have a tendency to try to undermine the legitimate government of the time and try to infiltrate the corridors of power, you might say, especially in the fields of education, where they have built and established an educational system of schools and colleges, universities around the world. I'm in Canada here, and there are several schools in this country that were founded by Jesuits in Quebec and throughout Canada, and certainly throughout the United States and all over the world. Mr. Trump is heavily influenced by the Jesuits. Just look at his cabinet, for example. He has a cabinet of people who almost 100% of these people are either Jesuits or have been trained by Jesuits. gone to Jesuit schools. Just look at the record. It's available. See where these people went to school, and you'll find that those schools are Jesuit-run schools. He's completely surrounded by Jesuits, and he himself is a Jesuit. He says on the surface that he's a Presbyterian, but that's just a smokescreen. He's actually a Jesuit at heart. And this would explain his staunch pro-life position, for example. He's against the pro-choice movement, and he has stated a number of times that he's pro-life, and that stems from his Jesuit roots and influence. Point number 5, he's vengeful. He is a very vengeful person. You do him wrong, don't expect him to forgive and forget. That's not part of Donald Trump's makeup. It's not part of his persona. I've read a number of his books before he even made it clear that he was interested in becoming president years ago. And I was quite surprised at how unapologetic he is when it comes to getting revenge and getting back at anybody who has the audacity to get in his way, to get in his face, to give him problems, to criticize him. He doesn't let it go. He gets back at these people. And just looking at his behavior with his Twitter account, you can see it. He's still like that. He doesn't believe in just letting things go. If somebody gets at him, hits out at him, he lashes out. He's quick to lash back at people, which is a sign of his vengeful nature, and it's one of the signs of an Antichrist being. And I'll move on quickly to point number 6. Donald Trump is a self-celebrated womanizer, fornicator, and immoral being. He's been married 3 times. And you know what? He has admitted that he is the reason why he got divorced in those first 2 marriages. And he admits that he was an adulterous husband, had affairs, had other women on the side, and he admits that that's the reason why his 2 marriages failed. It was from his own doing. And yet he's not apologetic about it. He admits it. He's not sorry about it. So that's something that his current wife should be somewhat concerned about. He's not sorry. In fact, he's not sorry about anything he's done. Check the records and find places where Donald Trump has admitted something and he is sorry, he's apologized, and he said he would never do it again. You're going to be looking a long time because you're not going to find it. In fact, I saw an interview of him, forget when that was, but the interviewer asked him point blank, Mr. Trump, is there anything that you're sorry about? Is there anything you need to apologize for? You know what Trump's reaction was? He stared the interviewer in the eyes for several seconds without saying a word. Just looked at him. There was an awkward moment. The reporter asked him again, is there anything? And Trump just said, there's nothing that I need to apologize for. If I do something wrong, I will apologize. But that hasn't happened. That hasn't happened yet. So I'm not going to apologize for anything if I didn't do anything wrong. That was his response. To date, I'm not aware of any apology that he has made for anything. If you can find something please feel free to put it in your comments afterwards. I'd love to see it. Finally, number 7. Where has Donald Trump been living for the past couple of decades before he moved into the White House? What was his abode? Did he live in a house? Didn't live in an apartment? Did he live in a mansion? No. He didn't live in a house, didn't live in a mansion. Where did he live? Well, he lived in a tower. A tower that bears his name. It's called Trump Tower in Manhattan. In probably the best part of Manhattan. It's a beautiful, tall building, piercing the firmament, so to speak, the clouds. It's golden, it's glass, it's very, very classy. Beautiful place, fit for a king. Fit for Donald Trump. And he's been living that way in a tower, in the penthouse of the tower, and he's been spending the last several decades literally looking out of that tower and looking down at the rest of us, looking down at the people of New York, looking down at the people of New York State, looking down at everybody. He's been in that tower, literally looking down at all of us. And he feels that that's his right. He's entitled to that. After all, he's Donald J. Trump, multi-billionaire, master deal maker. He's perfected the art of the deal, written about it. He's had a great television show, The Apprentice, great ratings, which he loves to brag about. And in that show, of course, in The Apprentice, it all revolves around Donald Trump. He's the one that starts the show off, gives his instructions for the tasks that he asks these underlings to perform. And then he periodically checks in on how they're doing on their projects. And they all defer to him, Mr. Trump, and treat him almost as some sort of a divine being, which you can see he relishes that. He loves that. And at the end of the show, of course, he calls everybody into the boardroom where he systematically examines them and evaluates how they did. And in the end, of course, somebody gets fired. And you can see he enjoys that. That's the climax for him, is telling somebody, you're fired. He may look like, he's torn at times and, seems almost reluctant to do it. But you can see that deep down, he gets a thrill out of doing that, eliminating people and watching the others fight it out, duke it out to see who will come out on top and who will be the apprentice who has the privilege of working for none other than Mr. Trump. So it's all about ego for him. And he's been doing that for many years. And you can see that, this is all self-serving, which speaks to my first point, that he's full of himself. He is a narcissist who just loves to hear himself. He loves to look at himself. Loves to talk about himself. And living in a tower is another sign, in my view, that this is an Antichrist being. The Hebrew scriptures in the book of Genesis, the 11th chapter, speaks of a tower. And for those of you who are even casual biblical students or scholars, you will recall the story of this edifice, this tall, freestanding structure that was built on the plain of Shinar, we're told. Said in the third verse of chapter 11, it says, they said to one another, these are the people who were in the area. Apparently this was not long after the flood, story of the flood with Noah and his family. After the flood ended, people were again populating the earth. And they said to one another, go, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, go, let us build a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make a name, let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the whole earth. So these people wanted to make a name for themselves. Does this sound familiar? They wanted to be famous, in other words. And they thought that by building this tower, all the people around would see this tower and say to themselves, who built that tower? Whoever built this tower, wow, those people are amazing. They're smart. They're clever. They're great people. And this is the main reason why the tower was built. They wanted to make a name for themselves. Sound familiar, folks? This is what Donald Trump has done. He built that tower. He put his name on it because he wanted everybody to see how great he is. Not just the tower. That's not the only way he looks down at people. What about the helicopter? Flies around, and at least the helicopter maybe has more than one. I don't know. I don't really care. All I know is he loves to fly around in that machine. And again, it gives him a chance to fly around and look down at everyone below him. In his eyes, I'm sure he sees all these little people down there as suckers, getting caught in traffic jams in gridlock in New York City, while he gets to fly around free as a bird up in the sky. Again, another egotistical activity where he gets to look down at everybody and feel superior to all of us. So I've outlined 7 good reasons to believe that this man, this demon, who's in the White House as we speak, is an Antichrist power. He's full of himself. His main motivator in life is the quest for money, regardless of who he steps on and exploits in order to get it. He's willing to do it, and he has done it, and he's unapologetic about it. His disrespect for the rule of law, as I've told you already, it's very, very likely that he's going to declare a military running of the country, otherwise known as martial law. The Constitution could well be suspended under his regime. And fourthly, he's a Jesuit, and he's controlled by Jesuits. And I forgot or neglected to mention, one of the goals of the Jesuits is to bring in a new world order with them controlling it. They have an ambition too, to rule the world. They've been trying for centuries to do it. And I believe under this presidency, there is an opportunity for them to realize their ultimate goal of world domination, with the Pope as the spiritual and quite possibly the literal head of this new world order, which has a globalist agenda. Despite Donald Trump's positioning, posturing as if he's against globalism, ultimately, I believe he will be serving the interests of the globalists, namely the Jesuit order. And the fact that he's so vengeful, he's a fornicator, and he has been living in that tower, they all point to the fact that Donald Trump is in fact an Antichrist, quite possibly the most prominent, visible Antichrist in the world today. I want to thank you again for tuning in. This video was considerably longer than the first one. I understand that. And I wanted to go deeper into what I had scratched the surface on last time. Please feel free to put your comments on the comment box there. I'd love to read them and respond to you. And until next time, I bid you shalom. And remember that the God of Israel can be your God.